let's do another example using the precise definition of a limit. Here we are given a limit, the limit as x approaches -2 of x squared equals 4. And given this limit and the epsilon value, 0.05, we need to determine a delta. So we have our c value, c equals -2. My function, f of x, is x squared. My limit, L equals 4, and epsilon here is 0.5. And the way we always solve these problems is we start with our epsilon portion of the definition, which says the absolute value of the function minus the limit needs to be less than epsilon. So in this case, that means x squared minus 4 needs to be less than 0.5. And for the sake of my calculations here, I prefer to use 1/2. So we're going to solve that inequality. So that would be -1/2 less than x squared minus 4 less than 1/2. I'm going to add 4 to both sides. 7/2 less than x squared less than 9/2. And then we would square root both sides. Plus or minus the square root of 7/2 less than x less than plus or minus the square root of 9/2. So let's consider our graph and then also the c value that we are approaching. So the graph of this function, if I were to graph it, it's a parabola opening up, centered, or vertex at the origin. In this situation, we're interested in what is happening at x equals -2. And at x equals -2, we reach a point which gives us y equals 4. Okay, and that should tie in with our limit, right? As x approaches -2, we get this y equals 4 value. And so we specified that epsilon, as long as we were within a half a unit of 4, so at 4.5 or at -0.5 would give us 3.5. As long as my output is within that window, I will be happy with how I have chosen my delta. So let's think about this on the number line. Here's my number line. I've got x equals -2. And I have two values, one to the left and one to the right. I've got -√9/2 and -√7/2. And we disregard the positive because we are not dealing with the right half of this parabola. We're over on the left side of the x-axis. So what are those approximate values? If I were to plug in √7/2, or the square root of 7/2, 3.5 into my calculator, I get -1.8708. And 9/2, 4.5, the square root of that gives me -2.1213. So if I look at those two values that I'm considering to create my delta window, remember 0 is over here. We have negative square root of 9/2 and negative square root of 7/2. Okay, thinking about that as a decimal. So I've got -2.1213 and -1.8708. And so in order for us to choose our delta, we're going to perform a subtraction. Okay, we're going to do two subtractions here. So for this region, I would say -2 minus -2.1213, which gives me 0.1213. And on the other side, if I do that subtraction, that would be -1.8708 minus -2, which gives me 0.1291. And so, of course, we choose the smaller of these two values. The smaller of these two values is 0.1213. So in this situation, my delta value, delta equals -2 minus -√9 halves. Or rather, simplifying that, delta equals -2 plus the square root of 3 over 2, which is roughly 0.1213. And that's how I can determine delta given epsilon. All right, and so that would create a smaller window here, right? We want a symmetric window about that C value, -2. So I hope that helps a little more with our precise definition of a limit using this delta epsilon definition.